This is chapter 34, Dwight Eisenhower. One of my favorite stories to write in the entire book. I certainly wanted to write about Power's failed trip over the Soviet Union with the U-2 spy plane. And part of it is because I've always loved aircraft. And ever since I was a little kid, I tell the story in the beginning of the chapter about how I have a connection to this particular event, the U-2, the SR-71, and the F-117 Nighthawk, from the famous Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. This was a fantastically fun chapter to write. And how I handled it was walking through the decision-making process that Eisenhower was faced with as he entered this situation. We often don't think about how we make decisions. Very often when we read history or we read business case studies are another really great example, where we know how they turned out. And by knowing how they turned out, it's easy to go back and kind of deconstruct the steps and say to yourself, well, gosh, of course, she or he should have done X, Y, and Z, and isn't it obvious? And we all pat ourselves on the back that we did such a great thing. The point is that it's never that simple, and it is never that easy to make those decisions. You never have all the information you need. You never know how things are going to turn out in the future. Most of the time when people are predicting the future, I wish they'd stop talking about that and start talking about planning for multiple possible scenarios and how do you win in multiple ways the future could turn out. That doesn't make for good punditry. It doesn't make for good TV, but it makes for good business and it makes for good decision making. It is not smart to plan for the most possible future. You should plan for all futures that may come to pass with a reasonable degree of certainty. So this was really fun. I'm going to read you a short excerpt at the end to kind of drive that point home. But the rest of the chapter walks through the step-by-step decision-making process and the choices Eisenhower was faced with at each critical moment and how he responded. Knowing what we know now, it's easy to do that. At the time, not so much. So here's the excerpt today from the end. Considering what you know now, would you still authorize the U-2 spy plane missions? How much was that knowledge that you gained worth? This is a final question only in the context of this thought experiment. The questions asked of the president and the decisions that person must make with partial information and limited time continue to this day. We could do another round of what if during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Many of the same actors would be in place: Khrushchev, Turkey, Cuba, and Eisenhower's successor, John F. Kennedy. We could rerun the experiment with different technology, but I'm not sure we would make different decisions. How do I know that? Because we kept making the same types of decisions based on only slightly different questions. What if the Skunk Works could come up with a plane that could outrun the missiles? It would. The SR-71 Blackbird. What if the problem was that the plane was detected? What if the Skunk Works would design a plane that couldn't be seen on radar? It would. The F-117 Nighthawk. Eisenhower's presidency was the first time we saw the true impact of the arms race, a positive, negative feedback loop where one technology begets a responding counter-technology, and so on, and so on, until we're at the point where we can exterminate all life on Earth with only a fraction of our nuclear arsenals. But to view this as truly a military series of questions misses the point. In the end, the technology doesn't matter. The psychology does. As humans, we'll do just about anything to reduce uncertainty, even if it means that the process of achieving that certainty makes the situation worse. Add to that the uniquely American love of technology for its own sake, and the temptation becomes nearly irresistible. For all Eisenhower's leadership skills, he became trapped in the prison of his own mindset, a feedback loop we can all relate to, even if the stakes aren't nuclear annihilation. But I suppose I'm not answering my own question. Was it worth it? More than the immediate consequences of a failed arms control conference, one could make the argument that the urge to find that special nugget of critical information led to a series of hit-or-miss tactical decisions without a clear strategic objective. The failure to see the big picture led to a longer and colder Cold War than was otherwise necessary. There was also the human angle. both Eisenhower and Khrushchev had greater decision-making flexibility before the U-2 incident than they had after. Generals fight wars with technology, but leaders negotiate and end wars with trust. As much as I am personally fascinated with the technology of these beautiful aircraft, no, I do not believe the flights were worth it. I've seen the dangers of short-term, limited thinking too often in my own career to believe otherwise. To those who would call my assessment naive, I would counter that we can see clearly only in hindsight. I've tried to create a sense of what that decision points might have looked like. That's impossible. We know now how the story turned out. We cannot unknow that information. We cannot see other possible scenarios that may have played out. We were not faced with making life and death decisions with partial information in limited time. So this is an entire chapter. If you are fascinated with the decision-making process, this is the chapter for you in Marketer in Chief. So I know you'll enjoy it. I loved writing it. July 4th, Marketer in Chief is fully released everywhere books are sold. Make sure to get your copy.